Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again. I am here today to talk about Pain and Gain. This was a fan request and I thought that it sounded pretty interesting and it was pretty good. Let's start off with this. I'm not a fan of Michael Bay. He's one of those directors where if he makes a movie, that there's probably a chance I'm not going to watch it. But I would have watched this movie when it came out if I had known what the plot was. It didn't really. All the posters, I think, were just like the two guys' faces, and then it says Pain and Gain. And I was like, what is this? Like, I don't know what this is. It looks like a crappy movie that just everyone says is good because it's a big budget Michael Bay movie. But then you get down to it, and it's a true crime movie, and I love true crime movies. I love true story movies. So I was really excited to see how like a small Michael Bay movie was, like not like a big event like Transformer movie or something, but like a smaller scale movie, and it was pretty good. It wasn't the greatest, it wasn't the worst. It had a lot of problems, but it also had a lot of pretty interesting touches, to say the least. Like, for starters, the true story is that there were these 3 or 4 guys, because I think they said one character might have been like 2 people combined. It's the story of this gym gang, and they had this kidnapping scheme where they kidnapped one of the clients at the gym where they were working, and then they took all of his money and all of his property and then killed him. Or they wanted to kill him. And then, of course, they did a second job as well. And for starters, too, to me, this felt like it could have been a GTA movie. Like, I really thought this is exactly what I would expect a GTA movie to be like, in terms of tone and everything. Like, it was clear, I guess, that it was trying to be a satire. Like, there's a lot of stuff in Michael Bay's movies where it's funny because it's bad. And then there's a lot of stuff where it's funny because he wants it to be funny. And this movie is super weird because you're pretty sure that, like, he wants he wants you to laugh at all of it. But then you look at the story and it's like, ugh. It's not a very pleasant story, and it's kind of a, it's like you have all this fluff and kind of like icing on this cake, and it's like the icing is there to cover up how gross the cake is. And I'm not saying the movie's gross, but it's gross in terms of it's a really sickening story, and it's really hard to watch in terms of, if you can see through to who these people are and what they're doing and everything. And, because I know a lot of people, there was a big controversy with this movie where people said that it painted the bad guys to look like good guys, and then it painted the survivors like they were bad. And I can kind of see that, honestly, but at the same time, if you're just a normal person with a normal functioning, mind, these people are awful. And no matter like how many good things they do, in the movie. Like, no matter how many points where you're like, oh, it doesn't change the fact that they were really, really bad. And what they did was definitely worthy of the punishments that they got in the end. So, it's the same thing with Bully, where you could look at that movie in a certain way where it's like, oh, that guy deserved it because he was mean and he allegedly abused them. And it's like, well, why didn't they ever go to the police? Because I don't know. It's like, there's no excuse. And it's the same thing for this movie. Like, even though there are moments that are kind of uncomfortable because they do kind of victim shame, and in particular, the best part of this movie, in my opinion, was the acting from Monk. And Monk is in this movie, and he plays the primary survivor, and he's painted as this like really terrible racist guy, and he treats his employees terribly supposedly, and it's like, yeah, it is kind of weird how much he's painted in this bad light, and then you have these evil criminal bodybuilders, and it's like they just want to be better. They just want some fame and happiness and stuff, and it's like, ugh, okay. So Monk in this movie, he was my favorite part. Even though they tried to paint him like a bad guy, I really liked him. I thought that he was the most human character in the whole movie. Well, him and then the private investigator, played by Ed Harris. Those two characters I felt like were the best part. Both of them, I really wanted to see more of them in the second half, trying to get these guys and take them down. Because they put Monk through a lot of terrible stuff in the first half of the movie. I mean, they torture him, they keep him hostage, and you really want him to get his revenge. I mean, it doesn't matter like how much he supposedly is a jerk. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, they're torturing this guy, and it's like you really want him to get his revenge. So I really liked him, and the main characters, they were the biggest problem. Because all three of them, all three of them were really like cartoon characters. And not in a good way. I felt like maybe, I don't know, because I think that if you had made a movie about the story and done it in like a really serious tone, it wouldn't be as good, because the story is very goofy and over the top. I mean, there's lots of elements where you can see when they pitched this movie and when they talked about making it, they talked about these specific things. There's this part where they identify one of the bodies with her breast implants. And there's this part where they dress up like ninjas. And it's like, there's all these like flashy, marketable moments. Like moments that it's like, oh wow, that's really cool. That'll be really good in a movie. But the problem is that these main characters, in particular Mark Wahlberg, I'm not really much of a fan of Mark Wahlberg, and this movie just, it cements my disliking of his acting, because he's just so he's just so bland, he's just so flat and cartoony, and you just laugh at him. He never really has like any serious moments in the movie, whereas the other two guys, at least you can say they had a serious moment or two where you kind of buy into them and their emotions that they're feeling. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't really feel sorry for them at all. They well, I mean, they all have nice physiques, and just because they're struggling working at a gym, that doesn't really mean that they should go out and kill people and torture them and kidnap them. Like, that's not really an excuse. So, and then you have Anthony Mackie. He was pretty good, actually, in some scenes. I mean, I couldn't stand some of the moments in this movie, how cartoony they were in comparison to, you're thinking about how bad what's happening is and how they're making it so laugh-worthy and cartoony. It kind of takes away from it. And so Anthony Mackie's performance at times, it was kind of weird to see him being as cartoony as the other actors in the movie. I mean, usually he's always like really serious in his projects, like even the Marvel movies. He's not really the biggest like goofball jokester. So, but his character, he had problems because of taking steroids, and so that was kind of interesting. And it kind of I don't know, like, you don't really see movies about bodybuilders a lot, so there were some issues brought up in the movie that were kind of interesting. Like, there's another part later on in the movie where the private investigator, he's home, and he falls down on the ground because, he's so sore from working out, and he's like, he probably hasn't worked out in a long time. So the best of the main trio, surprisingly, was The Rock. The Rock actually gave a semi-serious performance. I mean, he did a really good job in some of the serious moments where you're supposed to feel for his character. He's trying to be a sober because he was an alcoholic and he was a cocaine addict. And so you really want to see him not get tangled up with these bad guys. But then the problem is that he just completely loses himself, and that's when like, oh, there's a dark person on the inside of him. Because, like, the whole first half of the movie, he had chances to do the right thing, to let the guy go, but he chose not to, and he chose to just, he just went further and further and further, to the point of where, there's like an outrageous sequence where he's trying to steal money from an armed guard in his truck, a money truck. And yeah, there's lots of outrageous moments in this movie. A lot of it, surprisingly, does feel like, like you can't believe that this happened. You can't believe that the police, they didn't even care about this survivor at first, about he's in the hospital, and they didn't even care, and they didn't even listen. And you're just like, these aren't real life moments. These are Michael Bay moments, right? No. Like, this movie is, I guess it's pretty accurate to real life in terms of, like, just facts and events. So, So to me, the important question to ask is, are the liberties taken, is the comedic tone, is it all worth it? Like, is this a good true crime movie? Is this a good true story movie about this gang of bodybuilders who, steal people's money and torture them and kidnap them? Yes and no. I've seen a lot of these types of movies. I can't really say that the comedic ones are better. Usually when people make things comedic in terms of like true stories, a lot of the times it's to cover up from, the fact that the story isn't very interesting. And that's what's frustrating about this movie, is that it feels like the story is really interesting, and a lot of the Michael Bay fluff kind of lessens how good the story could have been if it were told like just less comedic, less outrageous, less over the top. Not completely, because this also seems like a movie where they could probably make a straight-to-TV movie out of it if it were told in like a serious manner. I could see fucking in the 80s, if they made this, fucking Tom Selleck would have been the main guy and shit. Like it would have been straight to TV land. A particular movie to think about or to reference besides Bully, we'll get back to Bully, is Billionaire Boys Club. So they originally made a TV movie with Judd Nelson, and it was like 4 hours long. It was really, really good. It was played completely seriously, and it was an okay story. I mean, it's not the greatest true crime story, but Judd Nelson's performance made the movie, and he did such a good job. And then they remade it, and it's a movie that not many people talk about because it has Kevin Spacey in it, and well, he's actually the villain of the movie, as it turns out. And unfortunately, they turned the remake into like this comedy. And they tried to be Wolf of Wall Street. They tried to make this fancy, hip, trendy movie. And like, oh look, it has girls in it. And oh look, it has flashy actors from modern day like Ansel Elgort and Taron Egerton. Wow. But then at the core, they had a much more interesting story, because as it turns out, there is actually like a true crime conspiracy there that is more interesting than the official story. And there's this thing where like, oh, apparently the real villain, he got away with it, and then there's this guy that they thought was dead and he's still alive somewhere. Like, it's really, really interesting. But because the movie is just like this comedy, and because it's just this goofy Wolf of Wall Street wannabe, it takes away from the interest of the story. I mean, there's a famous newspaper, or no, just online article where they said that like Billionaire Boys Club remake only made like a couple of $100 at the box office. And this wasn't in the pandemic either. This was like 2018. So that's pretty bad. Now, Pain and Gain, it's not the same thing. It's like there should have been some goofiness there. There should have been some comedic, because it is pretty funny at some points. These characters are pretty funny because they're so stupid and dumb. But to this extent, this movie was, it was so over the top that, you know, usually when you watch a normal movie, you feel full after you watched it because, you know, it's a movie. It's normal length and it's a movie, you watched it, whatever. But since this movie is so over the top, you just want to turn it off. You know, like, I kind of wanted to turn it off halfway through because I thought this is so, it's just so, like, I don't know, like, it's just too much. Dial it down. In particular with the portrayals of certain characters, I mean, that's another strange thing. I don't know, like, why was that creative choice made? Like, the guy was really interesting, this survivor, because he had this great backstory where he said that, like, his grandfather escaped Nazi Germany or something, and he had this great, like, story about becoming a businessman in America, and then, of course, he survives. They tried to kill him like 1,000,000 times, and then he still survived, and then he's, you know, nobody takes him seriously, and then this retired private detective takes him seriously, and he's got to escape these guys multiple times because they're trying to come and kill him, and it's like, this character is really, really interesting and cool, and his story is actually much more interesting and, like, sympathetic than, you know, three muscleheads who, you know, they want money so that they can have women and drugs and alcohol. Like, wow, those are such interesting people. So I really think the best parts of the movie, again, were those two actors. There were some other great segments. There were some other great ideas. Like, there were some Michael Bay-isms that worked. There was the scene near the end where they're trying to return a chainsaw because it's broken, because they say it was made in China, so it's Chinese garbage. And there's like a drop of blood on the chainsaw, and they zoom in, and, you know, we see it falling, and it is pretty suspenseful if, like, people are going to notice. There's these cops walking by, you know, the employee, she doesn't even notice, it splatters on her uniform. Those moments were kind of interesting because it felt like, ooh, there was something there. You know, there were moments of genius in this movie where I felt like, you know, this could have been a classic true crime movie if only he had just dialed back. I mean, he already dialed back to make this movie. He already dialed back from Transformers level down to this level. So he could have gone even farther and just, you know, really tried. And then, let's see, what else? Well, and then the ending, too. The ending, they try to make them look kind of sympathetic as well. It's just very strange creative choices with that. So, and Bully is my other example because it's hard to, there's not really that much to talk about. I mean, it's very over the top. It is pretty good though. Like, I guess you could throw it on and just enjoy it for what it is, but it is hard to watch. Like, I don't think that I'd watch this movie again for a while, because it's really like these people are evil, and no matter how sympathetic they try to make them, it's not going to change, what you're seeing on screen. Bully is another movie that takes place, and I found it hilarious too. This movie, the true story, took place in Florida, just like Bully. And it's funny, like all this bad stuff, it's so typical for Florida. And Bully was played so seriously. It was played so, like, sober and straight-laced and dark and horrible. But it worked because there was, like, this realism, and you could feel all the emotions that the characters were feeling. You could feel, there was like a dark feeling throughout that entire movie, because you could feel that these people, they're going to do this awful thing, and to this, really mean person, I will say. But there's just this really, like, terrible feeling that it gave you. But it was a great movie because it didn't shy away from being real to life and being honest and, just being very, very straightforward. This movie, on the other hand, it was covering up a lot of the content with these Michael Bay-isms. Like, just showing, like, oh, look, there's a woman and she's dancing around and she has a bikini on. And, oh, look, here's some shitty-ass joke where Monk, he's like, I hate migrant workers. They suck. They all suck. And they're just these stupid lines and these stupid jokes and these weird. It's like, there's a lot of directors, they have their little trademarks, these things that they do. Steven Spielberg, he has like the vertigo zoom that he did in Jaws, and he's got his own little quirks. David Lynch has a laundry list of quirks. But I've never seen a filmmaker's quirks affect the movie so much as Michael Bay. It feels like Michael Bay is his own worst enemy, and like a lot of the greatness that could be found in his movies, it's covered up. It's like you're in a garbage land, and you have all these great things you could find, but they're all just covered in garbage. And so you gotta search through that garbage to find the good stuff. There is lots of great little things in this movie. I would recommend it, I guess. I mean, I don't like Michael Bay's types of films. But I guess I would recommend this. I just wish it was better in terms of, it was still worthwhile watching. I just wish that the story was done more justice, Maybe that there's a documentary and it tells the story better. I saw that there was a book written by the guy who survived, so maybe that's better. But yeah, I would give this movie, for all the talk about protein and bodybuilding, all of Michael Bay's movies are like junk. They're just like straight up junk food. And this movie, to me, it reminds me a lot of birthday cake popcorn. And I don't think that Pop Secret has Pop-Fetti popcorn anymore. But basically, it was this just regular popcorn covered in sprinkles and cake icing, supposedly. And it felt like, this is pretty good, but it's just junk. And, like, there's a kernel of a good idea in here where where you take, like, sweet and salty, which is, like, my favorite combination ever. But it's just covered in so much of that birthday cake icing and flavoring that it's overwhelmingly sweet, and it's overwhelming, and it comes right at you, like normally popcorn, you can eat the whole box, you could eat this entire fucking huge fucking tub of popcorn, and it's comforting, and you can go through it like that. But this popcorn is just so rich and over the top, and just so you can only eat like half a bag. I mean, if even that. But overall, this was pretty good. So please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought of the movie, and then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more honest movie reviews. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.